In imperfect competition, there are these things called monopolies. These are large companies that have a unique product, something like DTE with their energy company. Other firms can't enter their business, and because of this, the monopolies make the prices, hence being called price makers. This is great for us because DTE won't be competing with lots of companies, which makes their prices stay low. A monopoly graph earning profit would start with your demand curve down right here, and then underneath that is your marginal revenue, marginal revenue. And the demand slopes downward because as the price decreases, more people are willing to buy the product. And for the marginal revenue, the line is below the demand curve and slopes downward faster. And this shows the additional revenue from selling one more unit, which will decrease because lowering the price to sell more will also apply to the ones that come before it. Next is the marginal cost curve over here. And this line slopes upward as your production increases. And this represents the cost of producing one more unit, which is going to rise because of different resource limits or inefficiencies when you're producing much higher. And next, the ATC is going to be kind of over here because we're in profit. It has to be below over here. Okay, so this is our ATC, and this is a U-shaped line because the cost initially falls with the increased production, but then it can rise later, and it shows the cost per unit at the different levels of output. And then where MR equals MC, we're going to draw a line up here, and then you're going to take that line all the way up to the demand curve, and then the bottom edge of the area where the line hits the ATC, you're going to draw that over, and connect that to up here. And this is going to be our area of profit. So our profit maximizing point is where MR equals MC, and that's going to be right there. And then the price is determined by going up to the demand curve at this quantity right here. And then this triangle right here is going to be our deadweight loss. And our profit. And then our socially efficient point is where the demand equals the marginal cost. So monopolies are not efficient. They are not productively efficient, nor are they allocatively efficient for allocative efficiency, because their pricing is greater than their marginal cost. This means that the resources are not allocated to maximize themselves. And then they aren't productively efficient because monopolies don't always produce at the lowest point of the ATC, which means that they can be wasting their resources. They don't operate always at the minimum of the ATC curve because their goal is to restrict the output and increase their prices and their profits, and they're not as focused on minimizing the costs. If the government were to regulate the monopoly so that it earns zero economic profits, the ATC would be moved to touch the demand, so it could be that in some way if it looked better, but where it's touching the demand right here, so there wouldn't be any economic profits. I didn't have a ton of room to kind of clearly show where the consumer surplus was on this graph, but for a little side-by-side comparison, we know that in a perfect competition, if this graph was fully labeled, you would be able to see that this area would typically be the consumer surplus. But when you look at a monopoly graph, the consumer surplus is where that demand curve, where your like line of profit is going up to the demand curve, and then you bring that point over, and this is going to be your new consumer surplus for the monopoly. And if you look at these side by side, you can tell that the monopoly one is a little smaller, because in perfect competition, the price equals your marginal cost and the consumer surplus would be larger. But in a monopoly, the higher price and the restricted quantity will reduce that consumer surplus right here. If the government were to put a one-time lump sum tax on the monopoly, what's going to happen is no change in your marginal cost up here. No change in the marginal cost, because a lump sum tax is like a fixed cost, and that's not going to really affect the additional cost of like making one more unit, which is what your MC is. And then as a result, the MC curve in your like profit maximizing quantity is just going to stay the same. And then since your quantity isn't changing, the monopoly is still going to charge that same price here, which was determined by our demand curve. And then economic profits are going to decrease. So the lump sum tax increases our fixed costs, like I said, which increases the ATC curve. So that's going to move up our ATC curve. And the profits shrink because the total profit is our revenue minus total cost. And the tax is going to raise our total costs right here. So on our graph, our price and our quantity are going to stay the same, but for economic profits, the ATC curve shifts up, which is going to reduce our economic profit area when it moves up here. A natural monopoly is a market where a single firm can essentially supply the whole market at a lower cost than other firms because of economies of scale. And so this kind of means that the firm's ATC decreases. So our ATC is going to look like that. Another characteristic of a natural monopoly is a low marginal cost. It's going to be a straight line, just like that. So with a natural monopoly, it's natural for only one firm to produce because they can produce what they're making at the lowest cost. An example of a natural monopoly could be something like a water supply company or electricity, because with electricity, building and like kind of keeping a power grid is pretty cost heavy. So one provider per area, like for us DTE, is efficient. The marginal cost for a natural monopoly is often seen as this like straight horizontal line, because once the company is like put in place, like DTE, the cost of like having their extra like additional unit is going to be pretty constant, which results in the flat MC curve, because as producing each additional unit costs pretty much the same amount. An unregulated natural monopoly is where the MR equals the MC. So that would be right here, and this would be where it's unregulated, because the monopoly is choosing the price and the quantity. And this gives the monopoly a higher price and a lower quantity than what would be socially efficient, which makes higher profits. A regulated monopoly, which is our fair return price, is where the ATC intersects our demand curve. It should be right over there. And this makes sure that the monopoly makes no economic profit, which is a price where it can cover the profit still, or cover the cost still, but not making extra profits. So as a little summary, the unregulated price is where the MR equals the MC, and this is a higher price which gives more profit. And then the regulated price is where the ATC equals the demand, and this makes sure the monopoly doesn't make excessive profit, hence the whole fair return idea.